mean, he's testifying about what happened on the 18th and 19th, by which point both Barber and Lich had been arrested and were in custody. It's certainly not the norm on this side of the river for a police officer to get on the stand with no notes.
Robert Krajcik here in Ottawa, Ontario for Rebel News on day 9 of the Tamara Lich and Chris Barber trial. Both are being charged with crimes associated with their organizational efforts in relation to the Freedom Convoy of 2022, a peaceful demonstration and protest against what I call the COVID-19 enterprise, a series of restrictions on movement and speech, property rights and so forth that were marketed by the government as public health measures ostensibly to combat COVID-19. So if you're valuing our reporting here in Ottawa, Ontario, at the Tamara Lich and Chris Barber trial, please understand that we cannot do this for free. We have operational costs. Please support us and check out our ongoing coverage at tamaratrial.com. Today's court proceedings were almost entirely consumed by dealings with the latest witness for the prosecution, a police officer from Quebec who brought along with him 2 translators because his English language proficiency and fluency was not up to task for him to testify properly. This police officer was brought into Ottawa on February 17th of last year to assist with what he called crowd control. So he joined many other police officers who were brought from outside of the city to handle and assist law enforcement's efforts to forcefully put down the peaceful protest. One thing that occurred this morning that was noteworthy was this police officer's testimony that he arrived in Ottawa on February 17th of last year. So he arrived hours after both the defendants, Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, had been arrested. He then joined the so-called front line, as he called it, over on Wellington, where there was a standoff between police officers and demonstrators the following day on February 18th. At one point, the judge was very concerned about the admissibility of this police officer's testimony. Why? Because he had brought along with him a logbook of police records, which he testified were composed mostly of records from other police officers. He did not have an independent notebook of his own. The judge asked him if he had reviewed this logbook, again composed mostly of other police officers' testimonies and records, prior to his testifying today. He said that he did, so presumably he had reviewed these notes over the weekend. The judge warned that his review of other officers' notes may affect his ability to provide independent evidence. In other words, she worried that his review of other officers' notes and records would color his mind in terms of his own testimony today on the stand. The conclusion of today's proceedings revolved around an ongoing dispute between the prosecution and defense over the admissibility of 20-something outstanding witnesses that the prosecution wishes to invite for testimony to introduce as evidence in its argument against the defense. Now, this is what's important. The judge agreed with Lawrence Greenspan's correction of the prosecution's claims with respect to admissions. That's a legal term regarding statements from the defense counsel regarding facts alleged by the prosecution. Now, this is not an acknowledgement or admission of guilt on the part of his client, which is Tamara Lich, but acknowledgement that mischief did take place from some people in the context of the Freedom Convoy. So when it was down here in downtown Ottawa, some people engaged in mischief. The judge had to emphasize and explain to the prosecution that these admissions do not exclude the prosecution from inviting other witnesses, but may render the existing list of desired witnesses to be redundant. Because if the witnesses that are going to be brought in wish to testify to facts on the ground that have been admitted to by the defense, that amounts to redundance, and that's a waste of the court's time. So the agreement between Lawrence Greenspan and the judge at the end of today's proceedings is noteworthy in that they both sort of came together to reprimand the prosecution for its misunderstanding of court proceedings. The police officer that was testifying today, he arrived in Ottawa after the defendant, Tamara Lich, had been arrested.
And Barber had been arrested.
And Barber, both of them.
Both had been arrested at that point, that's right.
I'm wondering if that late arrival affects the validity or relevance of his testimony.
Oh, of course. I mean, he's testifying about what happened on the 18th and 19th, by which point both Barber and Lich had been arrested and were in custody.
The judge said at one point that his referral to his so-called logs, which were primarily aggregated by other officers' records, could, this is a quote, affect his ability to provide independent evidence. Can you elaborate on that for the laypersons out there?
Well, the usual police officer, when they come before the court, they bring their duty book notes and they refresh their memory from the duty book notes. Well, what's clear from this officer is he made no notes, none at all. There is a log that has some brief times in it at which various things were done, but he never made a note. He attended all kinds of briefings, he went to all kinds of meetings, never took a note. And when Her Honor realized that, she made the point that it's going to affect how his evidence is received and what weight it's going to be given, because that's certainly not the norm on this side of the river for a police officer to get on the stand with no notes.
Dear Rebel News audience, if you value the coverage that we're providing that cannot be gotten anywhere else, please understand that we cannot do this for free. We have operational costs. Please consider supporting us and donating to us at tamaratrial.com.